Edward Kenway, everyone's favorite pirate of the Caribbean. Or at least everyone's second favorite pirate of the Caribbean. Look, he's no Johnny Depp, but he's still pretty cool, so I'll give him that. You may or may not have heard of Edward Kenway, but if you have, you've likely also caught wind of a little old game called Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which was, for a time, basically everyone's favorite game ever, so it really didn't go under anyone's radar. You know, it's kinda like the Wind Waker of Assassin's Creed, not just because of the obvious seafaring theme, but rather something even bigger. This game, like Wind Waker of the Legend of Zelda, took things that made its predecessors good and flipped them on their head, but in turn also improved upon and evolved those things tenfold. And it even made sailing tedious too, so it's definitely the Wind Waker of Assassin's Creed. Though it's worth mentioning that Assassin's Creed 3 also had sailing, it was not very well implemented and had very little substance to it compared to the sailing mechanic of Black Flag, and as such it was a more or less ignored feature, compared to some of the newer entries at least. So for all intents and purposes, Black Flag was the sailing Assassin's Creed. At least until its sequel, Assassin's Creed Rogue, came around in 2014. Anyway, to get back to Edward himself, if you ask anyone who's read a book or watched a movie that they enjoyed the story of, they'll likely tell you that a good story generally needs an interesting protagonist. Not always, but it definitely helps. Whether Edward is this or not is up to you, but from a storytelling standpoint, he is definitely one of the more compelling characters to grace the Assassin's Creed series. Unlike some of the other protagonists in the series, Edward is special because he has a family connection to both the main villain and protagonist of the previous game, Haytham and Connor Kenway respectively. This family tie is fleshed out through several other titles in the series, including Black Flag's previous gen exclusive sequel, Assassin's Creed Rogue. Though someone like Ezio, for example, may have had 3 games to establish his story and character, Edward only had 1, but still has an incredibly detailed backstory thanks to the other games in the Kenway pseudo-trilogy. Anyway, backstory is nice and all, but we still don't know exactly who Edward is or what he did, or what exactly makes him interesting, and that's just something that the other games can't tell us about him. So to get a better idea of who Edward Kenway really is, we'll need to look towards the source material itself, his own game, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. In the early 1700s, desperate for a decent paying job, Edward Kenway sets out to make a fortune on the 7 seas as a privateer, or in other words, a pirate. Though he wasn't necessarily a pirate from the start. His wife at the time, Caroline Scott, objects to the idea of him becoming a privateer, and though she pushes to get him to sail for the British instead, she eventually gives in and allows Edward to take his leave and pursue his dreams. Edward, with his head now held high, sails away into the sunset. One day, the privateer crew comes across another ship and decides to attack it, but they soon run into trouble when they get in over their heads and their captain is killed in the ensuing conflict. Edward does his best to fend off the enemy, but the other ship's crew, with the help of a mysterious hooded man, manage to overpower him and the privateer's ship is destroyed. He eventually swims to safety and ends up washed up on the shore of Cape Bonavista beside another man named Duncan Walpole. Edward quickly recognizes him as the strange hooded man whose ship they had attacked prior. Duncan tries to barter with Edward in order to continue his own voyage, but things quickly turn sour between them when Duncan attempts to shoot Edward, leading Edward to chase and eventually kill Duncan in the jungle. Suddenly, unbeknownst to him, Edward is now tangled up in a harsh war between the Assassins and the Templar, a war which had been raging for countless centuries prior, and one that would continue for centuries into the future. The man he killed, as it turns out, was a turncoat member of the Assassin Order, who possessed a very powerful artifact born from a previous generation of highly evolved beings known as the First Civilization. Edward loots the body and finds a note detailing the mission Duncan was on. Without a second thought, Edward dons Duncan's assassin robes and takes off for Havana, as per the note's request. With his eye on the prize, Edward begins the journey that would lead him into many run-ins with the Templar, and eventually his own induction into the Assassin Brotherhood. Throughout the course of the story, he would also come to captain an entire crew, as well as his own ship, which he affectionately named the Jackdaw, after the bird of the same name. Well, that's the gist of it at least. I can't say much more about this game's plot without revealing spoilers, so we'll leave it at that. Though this is enough to give us a pretty good idea of Edward's path and what leads him into becoming an assassin, this still doesn't shed much light on his personality and what drives him to do the things he does. Throughout the game, Edward is shown to be suave and cocky, but sensible nonetheless. Like many other protagonists in the series, he has a strong sense of duty, but he will also do whatever he thinks it will take to reach his own goals. This is evidenced by the way he immediately jumps to take Duncan's mission for himself, without without thinking twice about what danger he could possibly be getting into. He doesn't just do things without a clear reasoning, though. Edward generally only gets involved in matters that he feels could help him in some way, and he doesn't just cause trouble aimlessly unless he feels he could benefit from doing such. Not much is known about Edward's life prior to the events of Black Flag, but it was definitely not one of glory. Nearing the end of the 1600s and the turn of the century, Edward was born to two farmers, Lynette and Bernard Kenway. He presumably didn't have a very wealthy childhood, so it's likely that this lack of wealth or fame contributed to his strong desire to build himself a name, as well as a massive fortune throughout his adult life. This would inevitably lead him into his life of piracy and eventually assassinhood. This drive and motivation is, in part, what led him to become an outstanding member of the Brotherhood. It's a large contributing factor, but his drive is not the only thing that made Edward stand out. He was also quite skilled from a young age and possessed a keen sensory power, much beyond what most normal people would have. This of course manifested in his later life as the series' staple ability, Eagle Vision, which was a sixth sense-like power passed down from the first civilization. This power was also possessed by many other assassins and even some Templar, and allows the user to track their targets at a level that no other normal human would be able to, even in some cases being able to track them through walls. In addition to this power though, he also clearly possessed a great ability for climbing and free running, which is a key trait of most assassins throughout the series, so it makes sense. Anyway, all of this contributed to Edward becoming a huge force to be reckoned with, and in 2013, as a result of the legacy that he left behind, Edward was targeted by the Templar-run video game company Abstergo Entertainment as the subject of their upcoming game, through use of a device known as the Animus, which allows for users to essentially live through genetic memories stored in people's DNA. Abstergo gathered data from Edward's life and used his story as the basis for their new game project, which is loosely based on the real-life Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Anyway, that's about all there is to talk about for Edward Kenway, so I'm gonna have to end it here. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, and if you have something you'd like to tell me or have a suggestion for a future video, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. Also, if you'd like to get an update every time I make a new video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. It'll send you a nice little notification to your subscriptions box when a new video pops up from me. Well, that's about it, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Way up she rises, way up she rises, way up she rises, early in the morning. Put him in the brig until he's sober, put him in the brig until he's sober, put him in the brig until he's sober, early in the morning.